Fantasy Baseball Deck, everybody. This is Austin, and that is Russell, and we're specifically here to talk about Justin Verlander's transition from the Houston Astros onto the New York Mets and kind of what that means to us as fantasy managers. I want you guys to come away with four goals, four key takeaways from this video that helps us all together and kind of why you guys follow me and support me and this YouTube channel. Number one, and this number one goal goes across for this video, but specifically for all videos, is my whole positioning and why I'm different from all of the other content that's being produced on Fantasy Baseball is that my whole goal is to teach you how to evaluate players, whether they're pitchers or batters, using universal concepts that help you. It's not valuable for your time to listen to an hour podcast of people talking about fantasy baseball and go over 40 players because it just takes more time to really understand why people think the way that they think. I want to teach you kind of how to look at and evaluate players on your own without me so that you can always make better decisions based on the information that you have. And that's tough sometimes. There's a little bit of you got to jerry rig some things, but it's doable. This is my number one goal. Number two, when you're analyzing stats, I want you to be able to understand the difference between an actual value and a perceived value when you're looking at player evaluations and also like trade evaluations and things. And then specifically using those actual and perceived value stats to better separate and identify independent players away from dependent players. We want to load up our fantasy baseball rosters with as many independent baseball players as possible, and we'll get into that and what that means kind of like moving forward in the next couple of minutes. Goal number three, and kind of like how we accomplish all the goal number one and goal number two, is a lot of times you have to transition these stats into spreadsheets. So if we kind of go over here to this this graph of all of the stats that ESPN wants to show us in regards to starting pitching, it's going to give us the top 50 players essentially, and like, their faces and their names and who they're playing for. And overall, how many fantasy points did they score last season? And to even start, it's a good example, like Shohei Ohtani, them not taking the time to separate him as a batter compared to a starting pitcher, because sometimes in some leagues, he's only looked at as a starting pitcher or a batter, and you can draft two separate identical Shohei Ohtani's for one position specifically. How valuable is he just as a pitcher? How valuable is he just as a batter? And we'll kind of figure out how to do that. But overall, we look at these pitchers, and we even sort of like, look down and see what the totals are. Like the totals and the final finishings of where these pitchers are is so much different from the, the ranking system of you're going to be shown on draft day of like where people are. How do you really figure out like a pitcher who's really, really good or maybe the best who just didn't pitch a ton, who's going to be all the way up ranked at number 10, like Jacob deGrom, or Justin Verlander, who's going to a new team, who had a couple small IL stints at the beginning and last year, but finished as as the number 2 pitcher in baseball and won an AL Cy Young. So like, how do we really figure out the difference between these pitchers who kind of represent such a varying scale of values? So whether that made sense or whether it hasn't made sense so far, we're going to dive into this spreadsheet. All of this information I essentially copied and pasted into a workable spreadsheet so that we can manipulate what we want to see. So when I transition all of this data over, I want to specifically identify most important independent stats are. And the most independent stats really are like innings pitched and comparing them with their strikeout rates. No matter what, moving forward, and especially because the shift is coming into play, we always want pitchers who are throwing more strikeouts than innings pitched. Because the second that you start to dip below that threshold, if you're throwing less than one strikeout per inning, that just means there's more balls into the field of play. There's just less opportunities for making those bonuses. That that strikeout bonus. Obviously we know at this point, if you strike out a batter, it's 1 point plus for the put out. It's 1 point for the strikeout compared to it getting dribbled down to third base and thrown out. It's a 200% difference in comparison. So we always want plus strikeout players. And that's kind of like, for me, that's kind of like the baseline of evaluating guys for their value. And there's a couple exceptions, but there's literally only like one or two exceptions. And that being Sandy Alcantara, but he literally like succeeds because he is a marathon man. He threw more innings than anyone in baseball. He was the number one pitcher in baseball this year, not only because he gave up not a whole lot of runs. His ERA was really, really good, but he was just able to throw almost 230 innings, which is kind of unheard of at this point with pitch counts and pulling people early, and the fact that he didn't have much of a run support, and like he's just kind of his own unicorn. But let's focus on the things that are kind of confusing that aren't really valuable to us. So if we look at wins and losses, a pitcher specifically cannot. Doesn't have anything to do with wins. Specifically, a win means that a pitcher was out on the mound for 5 innings or more at least, and that he left the game with the lead. So he left the game when his team was ahead, and the game ended when his team was ahead, and meaning that they never gave up the lead. They never it never became a tie. They were ahead the entire time after that. They get a +5 win bonus. The losses incurred, say that I'll go back to Jacob deGrom a couple of years ago when he won the Cy Young Award with the New York Mets. He had a losing record and won the Cy Young because he was giving up 1 run per 9 innings. His ERA, his earned run average per 9 innings, was around 1 run, and they just didn't score when he went out on the mound, and therefore incurred a bunch of losses. So his perceived value, these players' perceived value, are taking in all of these independent stats. So innings pitched, hits, earned runs, walks, strikeouts, wins, and losses, and they're calculating everything to give us a perceived value of 579 points for Sandy Alcantara. What I want to do, and what's really important to us, is to get the actual value for the entire season. So how do we do that? And how do you specifically do this for you is if you were to copy and paste this into your spreadsheet, you want to go to your league settings. So like if you go to your fantasy baseball page, this is me, Freddie Kluber from last season. There's a quick link on the side usually that says settings, or you can go up to the league tab and you can click on this is your fantasy baseball homepage, league homepage. Click on settings, and you're going to scroll down to your pitching stats, and these pitching stats are going to give you the answers, kind of multipliers for each of these categories, kind of like as you calculate them to see like who's valuable and who's worth what moving forward. So if we go back to the spreadsheet and you want to get the actual season value, you shouldn't have to recalculate, and put this whole calculation together, getting the innings pitched, whatever. But what you do want to do is basically get this this whole value. So like you're going to grab the season total of 579, this season total. You're going to go to your spreadsheet. You're going to subtract the wins and add back the losses, because our pitchers have no control over whether they earn a win or a loss. The most control they have over either of them is whether they incur a loss. But a pitcher going seven innings and giving up 1 or 2 runs is everything you can ever ask for, and that can incur a loss. So we want to erase both of those. So again, you want to grab this number, overall perceived total, and you want to take away their wins and you want to add back their losses. So what that's going to do is I'm going to basically, it's going to be 579 minus parentheses 14 times 5 parentheses, and I'm going to add back the losses. So it's going to be 9 plus 9 times 5. And the difference here is that's what it's actually showing. Like how much how many more points did they get because they were on a winning team? What does this do? It separates the really good pitchers on bad teams from the okay, good pitchers on really good teams. Now that we have separated like the wins and the losses away from these pitchers, this shows our actual value. Why is this really important? Aaron Nola, who is all the way down outside of the top 10, was actually the third most productive pitcher in all of fantasy baseball this year as an individual, but just by chance, he had 11 wins and 13 losses. So he technically had because he had a losing record, he had less of a fantasy impact, but the underlying stats is that he was the third most valuable pitcher in all of fantasy baseball. And as a preview, kind of looking forward, if we look at Aaron Nola down in the 30s, I forget exactly where he was. Aaron Nola, 33 overall, and he in fantasy baseball ranks, and he has had the most innings pitched in his career over his career since he came into the league. No one has more innings pitched in all of baseball, so he's dependable from a health perspective and gets a ton of strikeouts. His K per 9 is really, really good. And last season, he was the third most valuable pitcher in all of fantasy baseball individually. But what does that do? I mean, he's currently ranked the 16th best pitcher for ranking like in our pre-draft rankings. This is the value. This is why we like separate the stats to figure out what guys are undervalued, what guys are overvalued. So Aaron Nola is a really good example of someone who's extremely undervalued given his wins and losses. This is why we separate these stats. So now that we've looked at the actual value per season, this gives you, again, a look of the guys that pitched the entire year, which ones were most valuable, given their actual value, taking away wins and losses. And this is really good. This is really good to look at. This differentiator factor just basically means that there was a pitcher who had a losing record, and what was their difference? Specifically focusing down here at Justin Verlander, because he was on a winning team that had an incredible bullpen behind him too that held leads. He was one of the highest beneficiaries of a dependent stat being wins. So if we even sort that in all of baseball, and if we go actually smallest to largest, in all of baseball, only Kyle Wright and Tony Gonsolin had more points attributed to them in all of baseball because they had wins during their starts, which again is something that we can't control when our starting pitchers go out there on the mound. So this is kind of like figuring out how to separate who is valuable and who is not, regardless of what team they're on. Let's go to the actual value per innings pitched. What if a pitcher who had a couple IL stints, but was super effective outside of that, like a Lance Lynn who came back after hurting himself in the very beginning of the year, Jacob deGrom who didn't pitch much last year, looking to see again these actual value per innings pitched is a really good stat. So what this is their season value divided by their innings pitched, and this will give you their independent output per innings. This gives you the ability to really hone in on the value of people that were hurt, people that got called up, people who had innings restrictions, moved in and out of the bullpen, this, that, and the other. So if we go over to, again, actual value, and this should be, say, per innings pitched, we're going to go, again, the largest per inning, and it starts to show okay, Jacob deGrom per inning last season was the most independent player in all of fantasy baseball. Number 2 is Spencer Strider. This is a guy that I harped and praised from day one before he even had his first start. This is someone that again won the NL Rookie of the Year because again he was so impactful when he went out there. He averaged almost 2 strikeouts per he had the highest 1.54 strikeouts per innings pitched. And him and Jacob deGrom, again, were kind of in that same boat. Strikeouts per innings pitched, really, really important stat. So now we've decided who are the most valuable pitchers per inning. There's a couple relief pitchers that made their way in here, so I kind of struck them out. But we look down and see Justin Verlander, regardless of how many innings pitched this season, regardless of his wins, if we boil it down, take away the wins, how valuable was he? He did not get hit a ton. He didn't give up hardly any walks. He was the third most productive pitcher in all of fantasy baseball per inning. First being Jacob deGrom, second being Spencer Strider, the next being Justin Verlander. So that's really good information to know, even though he benefited most from these perceived, dependent stats. He actually was the third most independent player. So again, if we even go over here, let's project our starting pitchers to say throw 180 innings. Every starting pitcher who is in the starting lineup, in the starting rotation, the starting five, the best case scenario for any of them is that you want them to throw 180 innings pitched. Plus, again, especially at this point in Major League Baseball, where everyone has a innings restriction, we're going to go to the projected actual innings per 180 games pitched. If we do that, it cycles again. It's going to give us a very similar number, but per 180 innings pitched, Justin Verlander again is the third highest pitcher in all of fantasy baseball, and it's maybe a little easier to separate it, giving max multiple of volume to kind of differentiation between these two players. Basically the difference between, again, like even Jacob deGrom and Spencer Strider, with how good they both were, it shows like, a 3.17 points per inning compared to 2.96. Well, again, that's like not much when you look at it in a small scale, but once you balloon it out over an entire season, it's almost 40 points worth of production. So that's kind of what we want to focus on. And that's kind of how we can better project and view as a whole, kind of looking forward into 2023. And then at the end, I think it's always important to look at the whip and the strikeouts to walks ratio. So whip is walks and hits per innings pitched. And I think that this number, having a really, really low number associated with your baseball players that you draft, is so important this upcoming year because, again, of the shift that's kind of being outlawed in baseball, or at least reduced, and we don't know what reduced or limited means, but there are going to be batters coming out of the woodwork that absolutely thrash, that are going to be all-stars that we've never heard of before or have basically been kind of retired. I think of a guy like Joey Gallo, and Joey Gallo is maybe is a half good example because his average is so high, his strikeout rate is so high, or his average is so low, but his strikeout rate is so high. But his contact is all into the shift completely. He has hits taken away from him every time he makes contact with the baseball. So like that's someone who has potential to hit 40 home runs a game. And if he's not being taken out of the lineup because he's just not succeeding, that's someone who can like make a huge difference coming into this next baseball season. It's not someone I'm drafting, but like players like that who have crazy high strikeout rates and are just traditionally exclusively pull hitters. These pull hitters are going to become more valuable. So what I'm saying is why I'm looking into whip specifically is we want pitchers that have a whip less than 1. We want pitchers that are giving up less than 1 walk and or hit per inning pitched, because that many more balls in play is going to be that many more runs against our pitchers. Justin Verlander strikes out 6.83 batters per 1 walk given up. So it's a really good ratio, and I think it's a sustainable ratio. And this is Russell and his tail, who is in the way. We've talked about the importance of spreadsheets and how you can use them to manipulate your data. You want a pitcher who is throwing more strikeouts per innings pitched because of the shift, the lack of the shift that's coming up. Batters are going to be worth way more than they ever have. Pitchers are going to plummet this upcoming season, which makes it even more important that you're coming away with guys that are getting swings and misses. Looking at Justin Verlander's transition from the Houston Astros over to the New York Mets from an offensive productivity standpoint, if you're somebody who says, you know what, Austin, I really appreciate you giving me the ability to learn how to separate these players from good teams, from bad teams, I always will want, if you are someone who says, I always want a Dodger pitcher over someone who is, pitching for, like, let's say the Tampa Bay Rays, because I just know they're going to get more run support, and I know that they're going to have more of an ability to get wins. Then I understand that thinking. It's not necessarily a winning thinking, because you're depending too much on things that you can't control. But if we are looking at the difference and the magnitude of, like, what that means for us, someone who only pitched 175 innings last season and got 18 wins, with the Houston Astros. They were they were the number 8th offense in all of baseball. He's now going to the number 5 offense in all of baseball, who had 40 more runs scored this past year. So Justin Verlander's, ideally, his value will only increase compared to where he's currently ranked, which is at number 18 average draft position. So that's the end of my show. Again, kind of as you guys have seen these sheets before, my fantasy baseball cheat sheets and kind of evaluations and tools are always available to you. I'll have a link located in my my description, and hopefully this was helpful. I'm going to make 2 more videos today, both on Jacob deGrom and also Trey Turner's transition to the Philadelphia Phillies. So until next time, Russell and I say goodbye, and thank you for your support.